Now, for more on this, I'm joined by Garret Martin, professor at American University. Welcome to the show.
My pleasure.
So, Garret, how would you describe Trump's relationship with EU leaders so far?
Well, I wouldn't describe it as particularly smooth. I think it's been a difficult first meeting in many respects. You had to see what Donald Tusk, the president of the European Council, was very upfront by saying that there were a number of differences that still remain. I think it was certainly quite a disappointment for many European leaders and NATO members that Donald Trump did not reaffirm a commitment to Article 5. I think that had been greatly expected, and the fact that he did not do so, I think, was very disappointing.
And for people who aren't familiar, Article 5 basically says that an attack on one member country is an attack on all member countries. So how much should we read into that he didn't explicitly say that?
Well, I think it's very important because Article 5, on the one hand, has been the bedrock. It fundamentally is the bedrock of NATO. Without Article 5, NATO is a pointless organization in many respects. And secondly, every American president from Truman in 1949 all the way to his predecessor, Barack Obama, did reaffirm very publicly their commitment to Article 5. So not doing so, I think, is a big blow for European leaders.
Now, I'm sure they didn't welcome him scolding NATO members to step up their financial obligations when it comes to security in Europe. How was that received?
Well, I think it's not novel. I mean, a lot of previous administrations, pretty much since the creation of NATO, have called, chided, scolded, you name it, European countries to spend more on defense. So that's not new. I think the tone is maybe a bit more blunt and a bit more frank, so that might not be welcomed. And Donald Trump seems to have a lot of misconceptions because he talks about countries owing money to NATO, while the 2% is really a non-binding guideline.
So perhaps a slight misunderstanding there. Now, we know that the president did arrive in Italy for the G7 summit late on Thursday. What do you think we can expect from that trip?
Well, again, I think it's a theme with the Trump administration, great uncertainty. There's a lot of unknown. Normally, those meetings are well prepared. They're planned, finalized well before the principals actually arrive. But the accounts we have is that the Sherpas, so those who are sent ahead of time to prepare those meetings, did not have clear instructions. So there's still a lot to be sort of decided that actually in some ways might be very frank discussions during the G7. I think there are going to be some differences of opinions over trade and climate change. One of the great, again, uncertainty, sorry to repeat, which is what is going to be the attitude of the Trump administration towards the Paris Accords.
And to that end, how much do you think that might overshadow the other talks?
Well, I think it can play a big role. I mean, depending on how that goes, depending on whether or not the Trump administration decides to withdraw from the Paris Accords, I think that could have some reverberate on other topics. But there are also other areas, such as over Russia, where there's also, there are plenty of areas of potential disagreement as it stands.
And what about concerns? We mentioned the U.S. participating in the Paris Climate Accord. Now, we've seen Trump reverse his position on a number of things. Are there any expectations that this might be something he may reverse his position on?
No, absolutely. I mean, he's shown to change his mind rather quickly, and sometimes depending on who the last person he spoke to. In addition, to be fair, there are, I think, a lot of disagreements and a lot of disputes within the administration. The accounts are that people like Steve Bannon and Scott Pruitt, the PA head, have been pushing Trump to withdraw, but people like Rex Tillerson or Gary Cohn have been maybe less sanguine about doing so. So I think there's also the internal battles playing out within the Trump administration.
So the jury still may be out on that. Let's look at a very special relationship, and that's how both President Trump and British Prime Minister Theresa May characterize that relationship. How do you see the future of trade between these two, especially as the UK prepares for Brexit?
Well, again, that's one of those areas where there's been change. I mean, Trump had signaled an intent of letting sort of the UK jump ahead of the EU over trade deals, but now he's sort of reversed course. At the very least, the UK is not allowed to start any trade negotiations as long as it's a member of the EU, so at least until 2019.
And how do you think his approach might differ from the EU, which is essentially a known quantity, as opposed to, with Brexit, what's currently unknown due to the negotiations?
Well, again, that's really hard to say because the Trump administration has been, at least for the moment, especially during the campaign, took a very hard stance over trade deals, that they wanted to make sure that trade deals, if it happened, would be very beneficial for the United States, that they wanted to reduce some of the large trade deficits. Now, Trump has changed his course and been maybe a bit more open, for instance, towards NAFTA, showing a willingness now to renegotiate. So again, it's very hard to get a clear sense of where the Trump administration is going because there's no real sense of consistency. And a final point, too, which is there's also a lot of key appointments that have not been made. A lot of senior officials in all major departments have not been picked, and that includes in the Office of the Trade Representative.
And certainly a very key role, so we'll certainly have to see how that plays out. Thank you so much for your insights. Garret Martin, professor at American University.